What's up, Dad Bod Nation? Dad Bod Steve. We got another great story for you guys today. Someone whose story has gone worldwide. He was in the UFC. He's the winner of the Ultimate Fighter Season 11. Someone who's come to my school multiple times, and he is telling his story to everyone so that they can see how recovery can be possible and redemption for anybody. Welcome, Court McGee. Court, thanks so much for coming, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and I appreciate you taking the time. And we're going to have you at our school again.
Yep, I'm excited.
The kids are so excited too.
Yep,
it's going to be great. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, brother.
Yeah, so I'm the current UFC welterweight. I have one more fight in my contract. So once that's done, it's moving on. And then outside of that, yeah, I speak primarily to like youth, young adults, and people that are more prone to addiction, and in locations like that. I started a foundation years ago, and my former neighbor and close friend, former BYU football player, he's the executive director of the foundation, the McGee Project. And yeah, that's what we do. We just create opportunities for youth and young adults that want to change their life. And so, yeah, we've been doing that. I've been doing that for over a decade. So since early on in my career, I remember I was in the Ultimate Fighter house, and it was so early on in the Ultimate Fighter, they had like, different structures or whatever. It's supposed to be a 16-man bracketed tournament. So 4 fights to win it, or like your 3 fights to get into the finale. And then your finale was like live on Spike TV or whatever it was at the time. And ours, they had a 14-man bracket. So 2 people who lost that they thought deserved another shot would come back and fight again. But you originally had to fight to get into the house. So you had a fight to get into the house, and then you had your fights to get into the finale. But they had to like cut back on that because it's like 4 fights in 6 weeks, and your 5th fight is in the finale. And so, dude, it's like brutal.
And you're working out every day too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You would train twice a day while you were in the house. But if you won, you got a shot to go in the house. And I mean, like, dude, people were like destroyed. I remember the guy who fought before me. He didn't make it into the house, but one of the worst like nose breaks I've ever seen. And I was the last fight of the night. Everybody fought to get in the house, and you had guys coming back into the corner because there was 2 different corners. And, if like they didn't make it, it was that devastation. You see the devastation on their face coming in, or if they won, it was like their real opportunity. I mean, before that, Dana White's like, be the guy that left everything in there, be the guy that's because you got a shot once you make it into the house, to be a UFC fighter, the highest level in the world. And everybody in there, or at least me, was like, I was prepared for that. And, you watch a guy come in who put everything on the line out there, and maybe the guy was just a little better than them. And one of them right before, dude, his nose was just, I mean, it was nasty, dude. And he was dripping blood. And I remember his bag was behind me. And he like leaned over, and he was just like dripping blood out of his nose, and grabbed the bag. Sorry, man, excuse me. And, and like, that was it. And it's like, all right, Court, you're up. I'm like, all right, no pressure. Here we go. So,
that was for your first fight.
That was for the first fight to get in the house. Yeah. But, it's like lots of pressure, lots of ups and downs. And so there's been a lot of emotions this last 3 to 4 months, knowing it was my last fight in the contract. And then lots of communication with my wife, my sons, my family, my team. I have a gym, a mixed martial arts gym, and me, and I have two business partners. So one is one of my longest running training partners, since I moved to Utah County. So for at least the last 16 or 17 years, he's been one of my main training partners. Mm-hmm. And then him and his wife are my business partners at Agima Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. So, and we have one of the most active gyms in the world. Definitely in the country. We have lots of competitors in jiu-jitsu, gi and no gi. And then we have lots of competitors in mixed martial arts. Like last year, I keep track of all of our fights, how we won, how we lost, who we fought, kind of for strategy in the future. And we ended last year in December with 67 fights. So
that's a lot.
Yeah. And that's from very first amateur MMA fight all the way to the UFC and kind of everything in between. Definitely more amateurs just starting than, a consistent pro, but lots of consistency. And we have a lot of fighters that are ready to make that jump to the next stage. So it's been pretty crazy this last little bit. And then lots of emotions and ups and downs with making a decision on this being my last fight or renegotiating. It's a time in my life now where I have to look at the long-term repercussions of, having almost 30 fights at the highest level in the world, and then trying to stay consistent the whole time,
Yeah.
making sure I'm being ready, and just like, how I've carried myself as an athlete. And, for me, consistency has been the most important thing. And so consistently prepping, sharpening my tools, staying consistent with 7 to 9 practices a week. And the only time I've taken off is when I have surgeries. And even when I have surgeries, like I'm post-op, today is 14 days out of a knee surgery. And it wasn't a major knee surgery, but um, lateral and medial meniscectomy. So they put you under, they cut your knee up, they trim stuff,
Hmm.
and making it through that, not being able to practice and stay ready. And as you get older, obviously it takes a little longer to heal. And you don't want to stay out that long because you have new up and coming stars that are hungry. And, those are the guys that you are competing against. So I have to be ready for that. Um, and I'll have my last fight. I can't disclose the location, but it'll be this fall. And outside of that, that'll be my last professional, and tentatively my last professional MMA fight.
And
So,
have they suggested a date, or can you
so
have to
it's in
wait on that?
October, but location I can't really disclose, and I don't have an opponent. I will most likely be matched up around 10 weeks out.
Okay.
So, and it's just one of those things, like, you can't. Sometimes I've had like a 12-week notice, but I've always kept myself accountable to be ready within 3 to 4 weeks. And so it's kind of like you're always in maintenance mode, but you can peak. But keeping in maintenance mode too, I mean, can cause damage. That's the other thing, because you are very active, but building a community around you, building a team around you that keeps you prepared, but also too, I'm preparing alongside other people that are preparing, and it's like you can still get injured, you can still
Oh
get
yeah.
a nose break, you can still dislocate stuff, but it's like trying to manage that and maintain, for me, has been invaluable, because when I get the call, no matter the opponent, it was like, absolutely, I'm ready. And for me too, I it's like, I took uh I took a lot of really tough fights. Like, I got opportunities to fight some of the scary guys that were their it was their shot in the UFC, or they'd only have 2 or 3 fights, but a lot of people didn't want to fight them.
Yeah.
And for me, I was like, you know, I made it into the UFC. I have done everything to compete at the highest level. And so for me, getting an opportunity to fight a former UFC champion, or a top 10 guy, or somebody who's a huge prospect, like, I was like, you know, jumping at the opportunity. Hey, it's like, and maybe it wasn't the best, to like make it to the title. But 7 or 8 years ago, I made the decision that I didn't want to make the sacrifice necessary to become a champion, because it would be extreme sacrifice for my family. I
Hmm.
have 3 sons, I have a wife, and I didn't want to miss out on some of the most influential time in their life. And so I decided to build a team around me, not travel as much, and try to make it work to the best of my ability with my group here. And it's paid dividends. I mean, we had 67 fights last year. And I mean, we had people that took fights that they shouldn't have won and won. We've been able to match people. And I mean, it's like all weights, all division, women, men, and it's really cool to be a part of. Plus, for me, it's like I have thousands and thousands of hours of preparation and competition at the highest level in the world. And for me, it's like there's this saying, like, if you don't use it, you'll lose it.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have this abundance of knowledge in training and preparation for fights at the highest level in the world. And if I don't practically apply that in helping other people train, I might lose it. And so I'm scared to lose that. And now it's like I've created this opportunity, me and Dane and Amy, where we can really, like, I can use all of that experience to help other people. And we have quite a few athletes that are ready to make it to that next level. And professionally, like on the business side of things, I can make suggestions from personal experience, like with making sure that I've saved money, making sure that I'm, carrying myself as a professional athlete as if my kids were looking at me, and making decisions what's best for me and my future as an athlete, my family. And so it's kind of a unique thing where I feel like I can give information that's valuable, rather than, what I saw on YouTube, or just giving it a whirl.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And one of the coolest things, and I don't know if a lot of people know, is you do give scholarships to people who want to try out fighting and who might have a rough time, right, coming up with the funds. And you took two of our kids from my school after
Yes.
you came in and talked to them a few years ago, and they
Yep.
said, "Hey, I want to do that." And when they got released, they came over and did it.
Yep.
So let's talk about that a little bit. What kind of things do you guys do at Agema? And you guys just moved into a bigger facility too, right, from the Provo Mall
Yeah.
into a bigger place in Orem.
Well, no. We're still in the Provo Mall. We just
Okay.
moved a couple of units over. So I leased a little bit bigger space and then another space on the side of it. So we
Okay.
built like a great big custom gym. We had an elevated mat that is like, you know, we kind of based it off of a tumbling gym where it's cushioned, and so you can get takedowns, you can drill a little bit more effectively, and not like the likelihood of getting injured
Oh,
significantly
that's
goes
cool.
down. So we have a big custom mat. It's a lot nicer, and we have more space to accommodate a growing student body. But yeah, getting back to the McGee project, that's what we do. I take these opportunities to go speak. I share my story, and then
Hmm.
kids will come up to me after, and I'm interested in fighting. I'm interested in changing my life, and a lot of the kids that I eventually end up working with, it's like they've come from a rough background, or maybe they've come from a normal background, and they are really interested in some sort of outlet, and the outlet of training and mixed martial arts, coming to a safe place where they can learn how to compete, they can compete, and then us offering scholarships, if they fall in line with the criteria. um, they have an opportunity to basically have a membership for up to 3 months, get some gear, and I can introduce them to, people that have been in the same position as them, and we can offer like work, like jobs. We've helped people with housing.
Do they work at the gym or?
Sometimes they work at the gym. I've had a few that have stuck around and worked at the gym. I've had a few that have come in and they got their scholarship. They started training and practicing, and then, you know, found recovery, and then had an opportunity at a job and took a job. And then pretty soon, it's like they're paying their own membership, they're growing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, yeah, all kinds of different avenues for success. So,
No, that's great. That is great. So how can someone get a hold of you for that? Like if someone is interested in that and they're in Utah County and they're like, "Hey, I want to try this out." What would they do to reach out to you guys?
so they can reach out through the McGeeproject.org. So you
Okay.
can pull up the website and there's a contact. It's contact at McGeeproject.org, and they can send us an email. And then anytime we go out and I do a speaking gig or we do an engagement
Hmm.
or something, um, usually like there's opportunities created there, so they'll talk to us, and then I just kind of I sit down with the individual. We kind of communicate what they're interested in and what they're looking for.
Nice.
And it isn't always with mixed martial arts. Obviously, like that's kind of the easiest route, and I can offer that and then help them and guide them. But I had a kid that he got out of juvenile justice. He still had 2 years of high school. He still had eligibility. He ended up going back to high school and then having an opportunity to go to a club for wrestling. And then we were able to help pay for his club fees for the year.
Oh, that's cool.
And, it helped him mature, helped him, succeed. And so it's like, it's pretty diverse, and it's not one way, but yeah, they can reach out. And then it's called our Punch Pass program. And so it creates an opportunity for training at a gym. And I have a lot of partnerships with a lot of gyms across the country. So it's like, it doesn't have to be just in Utah. It's like we can have a few phone calls and a few conversations, and then we can work with, whoever owns the gym. I know we've done it in a few different locations, uh, and there's been a lot of success.
That is
So,
awesome. Yeah, and having those connections is key,
yeah.
right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
knowing it's always
Yep.
what's the saying? It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yep.
so that's really cool. I didn't know you guys were able to do that across the state.
Yeah. I spoke, I spoke in Harlem, New York, and it was the UFC had me come out to an event, and me and my wife got to go to it. It was the first BMF title, actually, and we watched the fights. But before that, we went to, I believe it was a charter school, or I think it was a charter school in Harlem, and we went and spoke, and there was a panel of us. So
Mhm.
we spent about 5 to 10 minutes each, and then did a Q&A. And we had a kid come up that was interested in boxing. There was a boxing gym not too far away from there, and so I just reached out to the boxing gym. I pulled him up, like talked on the phone with a guy, told him who I was. We ended up going over and meeting him, and we ended up getting a membership for that kid for 3 months. And then there was really no follow through. I didn't keep in touch with the kid,
Mhm.
but the guy who owned the gym said he was doing great the last time that I communicated with him. And that was several years ago, but it's like little opportunities like that. And the McGee project was the one that foot the bill for that. And it wasn't very much, financially, it wasn't very much, but can you imagine? I can only imagine if like I got locked up in juvenile justice in Davis County, and there was, I don't know if he was a counselor or what he was at the time, but he was over me,
Mhm.
and he knew I wanted to wrestle, and he knew I was a wrestler, and he was a former wrestler, and he let me out to go to a wrestling practice. And I will never forget that. And I just think like if I would have had an opportunity to go to a club practice and had access to club practices, like I would have walked miles to go to a club practice, because my dream and my aspiration at that age was to be Mark Kerr, the Smashing Machine, and I knew my quickest route to being a Division I All American was being on a club team.
Mhm.
And it's like at the time, I think looking back, I probably wouldn't have asked my parents to foot the bill for that because I don't know that they could have afforded it. However, that opportunity wasn't there.
Mhm.
And if I can create an opportunity like that, it's like I look back, if I would have had an opportunity to wrestle in college and taken that opportunity, you know, where would I have been? Looking back now and what I accomplished, like obviously there's a good likelihood that I would have qualified for nationals. I can't tell you whether or not I would have been an All-American, but
Yeah.
if I went from my first fight to 7 fights later, fighting a legend in the sport, and then within about 2.5 years, making it into the UFC, and then reaching the heights of like, you know, top four, top five in the world, a fight or two away from possibly fighting Anderson Silva, to, competing against former champions, beating a guy that would become a UFC champion. I look at that and I think there's a possibility I might have been an All-American had I had taken opportunities.
Yeah.
But those opportunities got taken, and it wasn't because, well, part of it was because of Title IX. I was an '03 graduate in Utah, and
Okay.
so and they had acquitted every program in the state, and they didn't start till the latter part of 2003, 2004, where there was a Utah Valley University. Now it was UVSC,
Yep.
or it was a
Yeah. Utah Valley State College.
yeah. It was a junior college,
Yep.
and they started a program in 2004, and I believe it was Cody Sanderson that was supposed to be the head coach, which is one of the four Sanderson brothers,
Mhm.
and Kale being kind of the most famous, Kyler running the Sanderson Wrestling Academy, like the incredible wrestling family. Their dad, Steve,
Yeah.
kind of built that Wasatch, one of the top teams ever to come out of the state of Utah. And so it's like, had I, number one, had not been prescribed pain pills and had the disease of addiction inherit my personality, and then starting that chain reaction of taking those first, couple of pills and mixing it with alcohol, number one, that took all of my opportunities away.
Yeah.
And when the opportunity came to possibly wrestle there, I was fully addicted and drinking and using alcoholically. And then the fear of actually going to college, which I made it through that. I went to Weber State for a year, but I dropped out after my first year, or I didn't. I stopped after my first 2 semesters, my first year, and part of it was because of the substance abuse, and they didn't have a wrestling program. They had a club program, but I wasn't going to pay for a club program.
Yeah.
I wanted to go to college and wrestle, but I lost that opportunity partly because of fear and mostly because of substance abuse.
Yeah. And that was one of the biggest things about your story too, because I think I remember you saying to the kids, like when you applied for the Ultimate Fighter the first time,
Mhm.
you got the interview,
Yep.
but you didn't tell them about that. You kind of went through
No.
the questions and just
Yep.
kept that away. But then
Yep.
you, on the second time, you broke out and said, "Hey, here's why." And I
Yep.
went through addiction, and they were like, "Hey, this is an incredible story."
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of
Yep.
what got you that
That's the
opportunity.
whole reason I made it onto the Ultimate Fight. I mean, obviously you need to have a record. They look at your record.
Yeah.
They want to make sure that you can compete
Yeah.
for the reality television show. Like their interest is making television.
Yep.
And I didn't know that. I had no idea. It's like
Mhm.
I tried out. I wanted to fight in the UFC, and I was in my first year of recovery, and the first 18 months of recovery, and I had not cleared away the wreckage of my past. I was still on paper. I was still in trouble. technically I wasn't supposed to leave the state of Utah without like checking in. Dude, I had a no alcohol clause.
Yeah.
And I had success because I was an undefeated fighter. I mean, I was definitely the top fighter in the state and definitely kind of on par with being one of the top fighters in the country, a regional fighter. And then I took a fight with a guy named Jeremy Horn, and he was the first guy to beat Chuck Liddell. I think he had over 100 fights at the time.
Oh wow, that's a
I think
lot.
he has the second most fights in the world of MMA fighters. And this guy, like, if you don't know Jeremy Horner, you're newer to the sport. Um, like he was one of the first guys to take Anderson Silva to a decision in Pride. He like head kick knocked out Forrest Griffin, who was the very first Ultimate Fighter winner.
Mhm.
Forrest Griffin Stephan Bonner fight was the one that kind of made the UFC what it is today,
Mhm.
and like really put the UFC on the map. And he had just submitted Chael Sonnen in the fight before that, and then he fought me, and I had only fought his students. I fought a guy named DeMarcus Johnson. I fought a guy named Nick Rossborough. Fought a guy named Ben Fuimano, and I don't know that he was his student, but these guys were like, my third professional fight or my third fight ever was against a guy named Nick Rossborough, and he was like 6'6", and I think he had like a 10-8 record pro. And I had two fights, and I had fought two guys that it was their debut. They were my first two fights, and I was ready for that level of competition. But here's the thing: it's like I was in a position where I got an opportunity to fight that guy, and I thought that was my ticket to make it into the Ultimate Fighter because that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any money really, and so I did what I could to come up with the money to get out to Newark, New Jersey, and do the tryouts. And what it was for the tryouts for the Ultimate Fighter was there was two active portions, and you had to make it through those to qualify to go to the interview. And one of them was a striking portion, one of them was a grappling portion, and you were in front of a panel, so it was like, whoever the matchmakers were, Dana was there, and they would watch a group of athletes and then see if they could like hit the mitts, see if they looked like they knew what they were doing, and then they would do a grappling portion, seeing if you could grapple, if you knew what you were doing, and then they had your record at the time. So it was like, okay, well, this guy is 6-0 or 5-0, but he's never fought anybody, or he has. They just wanted to know that you can compete, and then it was a panel of the producers for the Ultimate Fighter. And so I made it through the striking portion, I made it through the grappling portion, and I was 6-0, and I brought the little poster of me squaring off with Jeremy Horn, which was going to be one of the biggest fights in mixed martial arts that had ever happened in Utah. It was at the Delta Center, and this is, in 2007, so it was like pretty early on. And I thought that was my ticket into the UFC, but the interview was the ticket into the Ultimate Fighter house. Fighting and winning in the Ultimate Fighter house is your ticket into the
Yeah.
UFC. And here's the thing: is I wasn't prepared for that yet. I did have 4 fights in 6 weeks for the light heavyweight title here in Utah, and I did fight guys that would end up going into Bellator and into the UFC and competing. Um, but I wasn't like spiritually ready. My recovery, like I was still in my first couple years of recovery. I had a little baby boy on the way. Actually, he was born by that time, and I was married. Um, it's like, but I was on shaky ground.
Yeah.
I still had multiple felonies and a bunch of misdemeanors in a plea in abeyance. I was still doing UAs, so a urine analysis piss test for the state of Utah that I had to like call, get my color, and then immediately show up and pay my $15 to do my piss test and get clean piss tests in adherence to my plea in abeyance. And I was just started working and maintaining a job. I was a commercial plumber, so there was opportunity to possibly become like a journeyman plumber and make a living as a plumber. And I was partly running a gym at the time. I had partnered with, he was my journeyman plumber at the time. He was an old school karate guy turned kickboxer. He was running a gym for cheap membership. There's a bunch of young guys in there punching and kicking each other. And I kind of brought the jiu-jitsu and wrestling in, and we made it like a mixed martial arts gym. And so it was like I was spread pretty thin, and I had put my recovery on the back burner. I'd kind of like slowly stopped attending meetings as like 12-step meetings as regularly as I was suggested. And I wasn't doing the things necessary to like start growing in like a spiritual way where my recovery was put first.
Yeah.
And here I was, you know, on a jury trial for a burglary charge with a plea in abeyance. Like I was facing probably 12 years on mandatory minimums. and I fly out to New Jersey to try out for the Ultimate Fighter. And like,
And
I was
did they ask you about all that stuff too? Like all
they
did
didn't
they do a
know, they didn't
background
know
check?
about any of it. I don't think they
Okay.
did background checks because I was never asked. And here it was, I made it through the striking portion, I made it through the grappling portion, then I had the interview, and they're like, tell me about yourself. And I was like, I deserve to be in the Ultimate Fighter. I'm getting ready to fight Jeremy Horn. I'm ready to make it in there and become a professional athlete. And it's like I've sacrificed everything. And then that was it. And they're like, okay. And I think every other
Huh.
guy said the same thing. I deserve to
Yeah.
be here. I deserve to be here. And they wanted television. They wanted characters in a television. And number one, I wasn't being honest with them. You know, I mean, had they picked me and I'd left a couple weeks later, I wouldn't have showed up to my jury trial. like, like I wasn't supposed to leave the state, and I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that. And I tried out November 11th. I went back and checked the date. I tried out November 11th, and I fought Jeremy Horn December. I think it was December 1st, 2007. And my jury trial was like just before my birthday. So like December 10th or
Mhm.
December 9th. And it was scheduled. I mean, what if I got locked up and didn't show up? And I don't know when we were supposed to show up. It probably would have been in January because that's when I ended up making it on the Ultimate Fighter. It would have been in January, but I didn't think about those things. I wasn't thinking about that at all. I was thinking about making it into the Ultimate Fighter, fighting Jeremy Horn. I'd put my recovery on a back burner. And then here's the thing that happened is I didn't get the call back. They didn't want me for the show. Like,
Mhm.
thank God I was not ready for that.
Kind of a blessing in disguise
Oh,
in a
bless,
way.
100% a blessing, because here's what it did was I went out and I fought Jeremy Horn, and I went out there and I was convinced that I was going out there to see if I could compete against him, because I was not supposed to. I was not supposed, I mean, I had 6 fights and he had fought for the UFC title. Like we were not in the same, like they wouldn't even sanction that event now. There's no
Yeah.
way on any planet that they would sanction that event now, ever. Like not even close. Utah wouldn't. I don't think any, maybe if you went up to like Wyoming before they had a sanctioning body, they might have done it. But that would have been an unsanctioned fight. And Jeremy had a bunch of those. Um, but they wouldn't have even scheduled that. And I went out there to see if I could compete. I went out, I fought, and we were the main event that night, and I ended up losing a decision to him. And after I got done, I was like, maybe I should have come out here to beat him. I just didn't. I didn't know that I could. It was
Yeah.
like, I mean, I was fighting. Like I just watched him head kick. Like we watched a video of him knocking out Forrest Griffin with this nasty head kick, and I watched him the fight before that submit Chael Sonnen, and like Chael Sonnen was a crazy athlete. Like he was a badass wrestler, badass Greco guy. Dude, he's incredible. Everybody knows him as the personality, but dude, he was a savage athlete. He took Anderson Silva almost to a decision. He got triangle choked at the very end of the fight, but he was winning that fight for the UFC title.
Yeah.
I mean, and that is it's that level of guy. And Jeremy took both those guys out right before me, and then they fought me. And I had fought a couple of guys on the local scene. One of them, a year or two later would end up making it into the Ultimate Fighter and having like a 10-fight career. The other guy would end with about a 60-fight professional career and did phenomenal. And so I had some experience, but that doesn't matter. I wasn't spiritually fit at all, and I had not worked a 12-step program. And so what it did is I went in, I lost my fight to Jeremy Horn, and it was kind of devastating, but also too, it gave me a lot of confidence. Like, oh, you can compete at this level. You can compete against some of the best guys in the world, but you also too need to sharpen your tools. So maybe you need to broaden your horizons, because I was training in a tiny little gym with guys that really didn't know what they were doing. I was
Yeah.
the most knowledgeable guy there, except for we had a few professional boxers that I was working with that were like competing at a high level in boxing as professionals. So like I did have good strict boxers and good strict boxing rounds, but it's boxing is not MMA. And so yeah, I ended up losing that fight, and then I went on my jury trial. And the thing with that is it's the first time I have ever been charged with something I didn't commit. I had a friend who also struggled with addiction. He had a relapse, and his mom overheard our conversation and came in and was going to kick him out of the house. And he made up a story saying, oh, it was court that was the doped up. It wasn't me, because he was going to get kicked out of his house because he was supposed to be sober.
Yeah.
And he was using his own prescription, but he was loaded. I mean, it was a benzodiazepine. And so you could definitely tell. I mean, he looked like he was under the influence. And I was like, dude, I was supposed to help you get sober. And he's like, screw you, dude, you're the drug addict, not me, and we kind of got into an argument. And I was like, dude, I can't help you unless you want to be helped. And even before that, I had a sponsor, like a 12-step sponsor, and he said, don't hang out with the people you used to hang out with. Invite them to like a meeting, invite them where you're in a safe area, but don't put yourself in a position to where you can find yourself getting loaded or something happens. And I was like, oh man, I'm different. They don't know my relationship with my
Mhm.
friend. And he was a lifelong friend. He was my fishing buddy. We used to draw art together. We grew up together, middle school or elementary school, middle school, and high school. We had a lot of similarities. We both like lifting weights. I kind of introduced him to lifting weights. And, I thought, man, I could help save this kid's life, but you cannot give that which you do not have. And I didn't
Yeah.
have anything to offer him. I needed to stay sober. I needed to adhere to my plea in abeyance. I needed to be there for my significant other. I wasn't married yet, but I needed to be there for Chelsea. And we had a son, Isaac. He was a brand new little baby at that time.
Yeah.
And so it's like I did not have my priorities in order, and if your house is not in order, go try to accomplish something. Dude, you're going to be spread so thin. Your mentality is not going to be able to focus on what you need to do because you're going in a million different directions. And being a UFC fighter to me was the most important thing. And you can't have that if this is in disarray.
Yeah.
And so losing that fight set me back. I had quit my great commercial plumbing job because I wanted more time to train for that fight because I thought that was my ticket to get into the Ultimate Fighter. And then I lost the opportunity to get into the Ultimate Fighter, and now I was jobless with my girlfriend and the baby. And I asked my girlfriend to marry me. She said yes. We moved in together and we moved down to Utah County to the top gym in the state, which I thought would give me a shot. They also too offered me like pretty much like a full-time slash part-time job where I could teach classes and I could also clean the gym for 20 hours a week and be paid for it. So, and essentially it was like just enough to barely get by. And I had to do like private lessons and I had to get a side job outside of that where I was like doing plumbing side work. I had to really hustle to make it. And I told myself I'd give myself 2 years to make it. And so that ended up being a blessing in disguise because the ups and downs I went through over the next 2 years, um, in fighting, in life, and then it really I got to a point in my life where I was forced to really focus on my recovery because after fighting Jeremy Horn, nobody wanted to fight me. I had, it's like I think the win loss record of the people that I fought was like 50 or 60. Well, no, no, no. It was over 100 wins and like 20 or 30 losses. And that's the combined win loss record of the people that I competed against, primarily
Yeah.
with Jeremy.
Top fighters. Yeah.
Yeah. What, and nobody wanted to fight me. I was the scary nobody that nobody wanted to fight. And so it was really, really hard to number one, find a fight. And then I started training. I was training with this new group. The coach at the time, he had coached in Pride. He had cornered guys in the UFC and he also fought. And he was like a world-class jiu-jitsu guy, top heavy game, which is great for MMA.
Yeah.
Taking guys down, holding them down, beating on them and getting a submission. And so I kind of thought that was the best. Well, it was definitely the best place where I could have been. And it's like I started to see success. It was starting to like finally ended up getting a fight, got another fight, and I just kind of put a couple of fights together. Took a couple of finally got a bigger name fighter, and then moved right behind the gym in this ghetto little apartment, and I just did what I had to do to make it work. And then right at about 3 years sober, just training, I tore my meniscus, lateral and medial meniscus, in one of my knees, and um, dude, I couldn't straighten my leg. It
Yeah.
was catching, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to get this fixed." And I got it fixed, and we had little to no money, and so like that definitely put us in the hole. It was probably a $4,500 surgery. I did what I needed to do to make payments, and when I left without pain medication because I knew where the pain medication would take me. It took me to homelessness and heroin prior. So I was like, I can't take these. I went right back to work because I had bills due. And, it's like somebody who was in drug treatment at the time had a day furlough, like they had passes where they could go work out. And our
Mhm.
gym had a connection with this treatment center. And so a lot of those people, after they made it through their first 30 days, and it was like a 90-day or maybe even 6-month like full like inpatient drug treatment center. And so after like that first 30 days, they could get like a Vasa pass or a Gold's Gym, or they could come to this mixed martial arts. And so a lot of people came there, and one of those guys came there, and somebody had told him that I had attended recovery meetings and was in long-term sobriety. And I had my knee busted up. I was making shakes, working the front desk, teaching my classes, hobbling around on crutches because I had a meniscus repair.
Yeah.
And I was devastated. I was like, oh my gosh, this was my shot. It's like I'm getting close to making it. And now this happens. And I ended up, that guy came in and he said, "Hey, are you the one that's in recovery?" And I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "Man, do you want to go to a 12-step meeting?" And I was like, "Actually, I haven't been in a long time." And he said, "Oh, yeah, well, let's go." And I said, "Well, do you have a driver's license?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "All right, well, you can drive my car." I said, "But it's back here." So we walked back, got in the car, and he drove us to a meeting. And I sat down in that meeting, and I had celebrated 3 years of sobriety, but I had not picked up, like, one of the things you do in recovery is you celebrate lengths of sobriety.
Yeah.
And I had passed a 3-year length of sobriety, but I had not celebrated my 3 years. And I went into that meeting, and the guy that was sitting next to me was like, "Hey, he's got 3 years." And so how'd you do it? And and then I got that chip, and I got honest in that recovery meeting. I just said, "I am absolutely miserable. I do have 3 years of sobriety. I just had surgery on my knee. I haven't taken the pain pills. It hurts like hell. I want to go home and take the pain pills, but I know I can't. I'm barely making it. I have a shitty car. I'm supposed to be fighting in the UFC, and I have a wife and son at my home right now who love me, but I feel like I'm not giving them enough. I feel like I'm not doing enough, and I'm miserable. But I'm sober. Thanks for the 3-year medallion." And after that, a guy came up to me and he was like, "Hey, I have a question," and he was like this, he was this kind of short, a little bit shorter than me musician. And he was like kind of a character. And he was like, "Man, it doesn't sound like you're doing very well." And I said, "I'm not, man. I'm in a bad spot right now. I'm glad I came to a meeting, but I do not feel good. I feel like I'm dying inside. And I have 3 years sober. And I'm married, and like, man, I should be happy right now. I have everything that I thought I would need to be happy, and I'm not." And he's like, "Have you ever considered like going through the 12 steps of a 12-step program of this 12-step program?" And I was like, "Yeah. Um, would you do that?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'll give you my number." So I started calling that guy. And over the next 4 months, I worked the 12-step program from start to finish. And then I immediately turned around and started doing it with other guys, taking them through the 12-step program. And over the next 4 months, my attitude and outlook on life completely changed. And over the next 4 months, my knee healed. I realized that I was completely self-supporting, and I was making it. I was paying
Yeah.
all my bills. Like, I didn't look at that like I looked at me like, "Oh, poor me. Like, I deserve this. I deserve this," rather than looking at that and saying, "Hey, dude, you were like homeless and strung out on heroin with a bunch of felonies and a plea in abeyance, and like looking like you were going to go to prison, and now you're making a living. You're one of the top athletes in the country. You really do have a shot if you stay ready and stay healthy." And at the time, we were training too hard, and I had bad partners, but I didn't want to tell them that. I was like, I just wanted to be the toughest guy in the room. And I
Yeah.
realized something, like, maybe you're a partner some days, and then maybe they're your partner some days. And if you don't have people that are willing to do that, you're in the wrong group, or you don't have good enough boundaries. And so I learned a lot of lessons in that process. And then I healed my knee up. I worked the 12-step program, and my attitude and outlook on life changed. I realized I had been completely self-supporting. I realized that I had become one of the top athletes. I realized my car was good enough to get me to and from work, and to and from like family get-togethers. And I realized that my wife and son loved me and were proud of me and were there for me no matter what. And I was sober. And so, dude, that changed everything. And then within that 4 or 5 months, there was a guy that came into the gym. Later on, I would find out he was going to purchase the gym and kind of take it over. And he wanted to get a layout of the land and who was kind of leaders in the gym. And he was a huge fight fan, and he knew everything about me, and he wanted to come in and practice with me. And so, it's like he came in, he was like, "Yeah, I'm interested in coming to this fight team." I'm like, "Oh, cool. What's your background or whatever?" And he said, "Oh, I played tennis at BYU, Hawaii." And I was like, "Okay, well," and dude, this is a real tough, like, 9 of the guys in there ended up fighting in the UFC. And dude,
Yeah.
some of them were real rough around the edges. Like Tank Abbott rough around the edges.
Mhm.
And I was like, all right, well, you can come in, because I didn't want to tell him no. I was like, this guy's really nice. I said, but I'm just going to have you go with me and this guy, Brock, and he was another guy. He ended up fighting in the UFC. He wrestled at Lock Haven, wrestled at BYU. He was from Virginia. He's like super nice kid, but he was like a great partner. And me and him ended up fighting both in the UFC on the same card at the same time. We were teammates. We worked well together. I would be his partner some days. He would be my partner some days, and it's like, so I'm like, yeah, you can go with we're both a little bit more safe. You just go with us. And so he came in, and then after that, he's like, hey, Ultimate Fighter tryouts are a couple weeks from now. You'd be an idiot if you didn't try out. It's the 185-pound division. And I was like, I don't have the money to get out there and do it, to be honest. And, it's like I make about $500 a week and I spend about $500 a week. And if I miss the $500 a week, then I don't pay my bills and I don't have anybody to rely on to pay my bills. And I don't have enough savings set aside. And I said, I would love to go try out, but I don't think it's going to work. And I tried out before and they didn't want me. So I was like thinking about that.
Yeah.
But the mentality that I had after I had worked a 12-step program and started sponsoring other guys and working the 12-step program with them was like, if it's supposed to happen, I put it in God's hands or my higher power's hands. And I was like, just do the next right thing. And for me, the next right thing was not taking a week off and going out and trying for the Ultimate Fighter, because financially I couldn't do it. And he saw that and he said, well, what if I offered to, cover your wages, pay you the $500 and book the flight for you to go? And I was like, well, what do you want? And he was like, I don't want anything. I want you to make it. So I called my wife. I was like, hey, Chelsea, this guy wants to pay for this. So, what does he want? He says nothing.
I love how you both asked that. What does he want?
Yeah. Well, dumbass, why don't you take it? And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll take it, and he booked the flight and did it. And we ended up becoming close friends, but I went out there, I tried out. And the difference this time was I was spiritually fit. I was armed with the 12 steps, and I was a person that was in long-term recovery. And I knew a lot of my character defects. I knew who I was. Mm-hmm. And I went out there open-minded. I didn't go out there closed-minded, and I did their little tryout stuff, and I did what I was supposed to do, and one of the guys I was picked to grapple with, I think he was from Compton, and I ended up running it. He was from South Central LA.
Okay.
And there was a group of like 10 of those guys, and they were just all jacked, shredded, and dude, super cool dudes. I ended up running into that guy. He ended up going to college, wrestling in college, but he was the person that I got picked to grapple with. And I mean, dude, this guy was a specimen. He was like, and I went out, but he was not great at jiu-jitsu. And so I was able to just kind of dominate the position. I wasn't an asshole, but I dominated the position, and like, it looked really good because we were right in front of Dana and we were right there. And so they were like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing, And, I ended up going into my interview, and I sat down, and they're like, tell me about yourself. It looks like you tried out for season 7. You didn't make it. It looks like you have a great record. You have 1 loss to Jeremy Horn. Tell me about yourself. And then they kind of like recited what I said before. And they're like, let me guess, it's your last shot. It's like, you deserve to be in here. Like, what's the reason for you? And it was like, it was my last shot. I was right at that 2-year mark where I'd given myself to make it. Otherwise I was going to go back and be a plumber and then train full, like part-time, and then work full-time so I could make a living and support my wife and son at the time. And I was like, no, not really. I said, the only thing that makes me different than probably a lot of these guys is I had an unintentional, fatal overdose on heroin, and I had a pretty gnarly criminal history. And, it's like, got a pretty good story. Had lots of ups and downs. And then outside of that, yeah, I can scrap. And they were like, great. We love it, dude. Okay, talk to you later. And I picked up my bag and walked out. And it's like I went there on good spiritual grounds. The first time I didn't. I mean, I shouldn't have been there. I didn't make that decision. And even when I went on this one, after I got the call back, they called me back and said, hey, you made it. You need to be ready to go, January 1st. And I said, can I call you back before I committed to doing it? Because I was now scared. I was like, dude, what if I go in there and I make it and I win? What'll happen? I've never made that much money or had that success or had that stress. It's like I'd had a couple of big fights, but not UFC fights. They were big, but it was on the local scene. Mm-hmm. I mean, it wasn't Jeremy Horn big, but some of them, one of the guys had over 50 professional fights. He was kind of the gatekeeper to the UFC at the time. And this is a lot smaller group at the time. I mean, there's only maybe 250 UFC fighters, 25 guys in each weight division. And so you knew everybody. It's like Anderson Silva was at the top, but you knew the number 10 guy. He was
Mhm.
just, he was right there. So it's like I originally said no. I was like, dude, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can go out there and do this. Like, what if I relapse? And
Was
I
this to the UFC themselves, or was this kind of a
this
discussion
this
with
in
your
my a
wife? Okay.
discussion in my mind, and a discussion with my wife, and then a discussion with like my mentor in the 12-step program. And I called him and I was like, dude, I don't know if I can go on this show. And I had these doubts in my mind.
Mhm.
I'd had these internal conversations, and I was like, I was really cross, man. I didn't know what decision to make. I didn't know what the next right thing was. And he just said, okay, well, financially, could you better provide for your family? And I was like, yeah, even if I just make it into the house, or even if I just fight and try to get into the house, I will always be known as one of the Ultimate Fighter prospects. And he said, well, what if you win it? And I was like, I think you win a 6-figure contract. And I mean, it's a big deal. Like, you make it into the UFC. And at the time, in those first like 15 seasons, I mean, it's still a big deal anyways, but
Yeah.
at the time it was a big deal. There was a lot less fighters. There was no women in there. There was no weights under 155. So like, it was a small group of athletes. And I was like, it's a big deal, dude, life changing. And he's like, okay, well, if you were open with your story, could you possibly inspire like somebody who's struggling with addiction to like make a change? Could you inspire others through being open and in recovery? And I was like, man, millions of people see the show, I'm sure, but I'm worried about staying sober. And he was like, well, you've been through a lot and you stayed sober and you're armed with the 12 step. Like, maybe trust in your higher power, say a little prayer. So I like got off the phone. I was like, God, give me a sign, and I didn't get any sign. I didn't get anything. And I was just like, I didn't know what to do. I was freaking out, and I was super sore because I'd been training hard, and I knew I had the shot, and they called me back. So I was prepping for that first fight, and I went and I did an Epsom salt bath. And I remember like clear as day having a vision of me holding up the Ultimate Fighter trophy. And I had this feeling like, dude, you have to go. Now is your time. You are ready. And I was just like, damn, I need some help, dude. So I prayed. I was like, just help me do the next right thing. And went back to practices, called them back, said I would show up. And then I showed up, and it's like the difference was I showed up spiritually fit.
Yeah.
And I was going there, looking at it now, unselfishly. I was going there to representing Utah and representing a person in long-term recovery. And at the time I was armed with the 12 steps. I was, my house was in order, and I was spiritually fit. And I went there with 4,000 hours of training and 12 professional fights, and I knew no matter what I went through, I could show up and do what I needed to do as long as I stayed focused on staying in the moment. And that's what I did. I ended up winning that fight to get in the house, which was crazy. And then I ended up fighting in the house. I lost a controversial decision. I was brought back. I got the number one pick for my first fight, but we were the last fight of that group. And I got beat up pretty bad in that first fight. First time I ever got dropped. Dude, I got dropped, like flatline dropped, right in front of like Dana White and Lorenzo and Mike Tyson and Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz. I mean, it was like pretty scary, And yeah, I came back. I won that fight, but I was beat up. I mean, I was like really, really beat up. I had a hard time. And then I ended up, getting picked to go on Chuck's team. And John Hackelman, his head coach, the owner of the pit, um, and legend in training mixed martial arts fighters and kickboxers, um, he had brought in a group of coaches that were kind of like, I mean, one of them was an Olympic silver medalist, one of them was an Olympic gold medalist. At the time, he brought the number one jiu-jitsu guy, who was competing in MMA, brought another guy who was like, um, Eddie Bravo's first jiu-jitsu black belt, and he had fought too. So we had like a who's who of coaches in the show, and I saw how he put together practices to help people get ready. I mean, you were training twice a day, so he would dial people back, he would
Mhm.
prep them. I mean, it was incredible to see him put together a practice. And how Chuck was there. I built relationships with all those guys. Yeah, and I ended up, I lost that first fight when I was in the house. And it was a controversial decision loss. And then I was brought back. I ended up finishing the next guy, and then I ended up finishing the next guy, and got into the finale, and like was just, it was incredible moment. But 4 fights in 6 weeks, you're beat up.
Yeah.
My fight to get in the finale was against Brad Tavares, and me and Brad Tavares are the last two fighters from season 11 that are still in the UFC. Um, and we've had 16 plus year careers now in the UFC. And it's just like, it's one of those things, you know, uh, so much happened, but I was spiritually fit for it. And then I came back home and, surprised my wife with, "Hey, I'm in the finale." And she said, "I knew you would make it." And then she surprised me because we had our first son, Isaac, but I was real leery to have another kid because I couldn't financially provide for him.
Yeah.
But we wanted another kid, but I just was like, I can't bring another kid into the world. I'm not ready for that. And then once I found out I was going into the house, she was like, "Should we try?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it before we go." So we tried. And then so when I came back home, she surprised me with, "I'm pregnant." And I surprised her with, I'm in the finale. So it was a really, really cool deal. And, it's like the coaching that I had at the time, the group of people that I had at the time, um, and then me being with that new team, I realized that there was a lot of benefits of cross training. And at the time the gym started to fall apart, that guy that came in, he ended up taking over the gym, but it was several months later. So there was this transition where there was no coaches there. A lot of fighters were kind of jumping ship.
Hmm.
So there was no team atmosphere. And I text Chuck or called Chuck and I said, "Hey, this gym might be splitting apart. It's looking like things are not great, and I'm not going to be able to prepare for this finale fight properly. Do you think John Hackelman would coach me, or do you think it's okay if I call him?" And he was like, "Oh, yeah, he'll coach you." He was like, "Hold on, I'll call you back." He called me back and he said, "Hey, I'll fly you out here and I'll let you stay at my house. I'll give you a car to drive so you can stay
Wow.
here and come to all the practices." Because he was fighting a week before me.
Mhm.
He was fighting the coach a week before me. I was fighting the week after. And he said, "We'll just train side by side for this. When do you want to come out?" And I took a couple of weeks off. And then, basically like 10 to 12 weeks out, he moved me out there and I stayed out there and trained at that gym with those coaches and with those people alongside of Chuck. And I learned so much from that time, from the training, how he like how he like figured out how to taper. I learned all kinds of new like drills and techniques and the system that he used to be a reigning, dominating light heavyweight
Yeah.
UFC champion. And it's like, man, it was incredible. It really opened my eyes. I stayed off and on with that team for a number of years. And then, a few years later, it was kind of like to a point where I needed to really like either stay home or commit to move out there. And we decided to stay here. I traveled and did as much as I could. But I had lots and lots of growth. I was able to train with lots of people. Like I spent a lot of time with Jake Shields. um, I was supposed to fight on the same card as him when he fought St. Pierre for the title. I was supposed to be the co-main event that night. But injury took me out of that. That's the only fight I ever had to like back out of, 3 or 4 weeks out of the fight where they had to find another. But that was Chris Weidman's shot in the UFC, actually.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was either his shot in the UFC or it was his second fight in the UFC. And he took it like short notice, 3 weeks out and fought a guy named Jesse Bonfeld. But I had this experience where I went and trained, in San Francisco, where I was training with Jake Shields, Nick and Nate Diaz, Gilbert Melendez, kind of that Bay Area. Um, I at the time I helped Jake get ready for Dan Henderson, and then he skipped over, came back to the UFC, and then we had 4 or 5 fights on the same card, so we trained together. So I would train with those guys for a couple of weeks. I'd go out to Hackelman's for a couple of weeks, come back home for a couple of weeks, and like did what I needed to do to compete at the highest level in the world. And then shortly after that, I was like, okay, I need to slowly build a team around me so we can start making it to the UFC. And then, yeah, it slowly worked. And, a couple of my teammates ended up making it to the UFC. And then it kind of brought in other guys. There was a lot of guys that came in. I mean, at one time, I think we had 8 or 9 people fighting in the UFC, all in Utah. And that was the height of the Utah scene. And now we're slowly rebuilding that. And, it's like now that I'm coming to the end of my career and I can put more time and energy into the McGee project and to helping youth, like my passion.
Hmm.
I can help them, hit goals, find goals, determine what a goal is. I can spend more time like working on delivering a speech to different groups and kind of like work in that nonprofit area a little bit and then focus on my gym, my athletes at the gym, my students at the gym, and building a real safe community. There's a lot of ups and downs over the years with training and fighting. And when I first started, like it was really frowned upon. I mean, even early on in my career, you know, in like 2010, 2011, you know, oh, well, what do you do? You know, and I'm a professional athlete, you know, they're like, oh, well, what sport do you play? And I was like, well, I do mixed martial arts. And a lot of people didn't know what that was. They were like, well, what is that? Oh, the cage fighting?
Cage
Wait, you can
fighting.
make a
Yeah.
living doing that? You know, and it was like, well, yeah, of course you can, you know? And yeah, so it's like, and early on in my career too, I knew just like the average career length of a UFC fighter is 1.9 years and 3 fights. And that's still right now. That's like, it's pretty close to that right now. And that's your average career length. So
Yeah.
like, if you have
It's a tough
yeah,
profession then.
tough profession to make a living, and entry level fighters, you know, it's like they make anywhere from 10,000 to show, 10,000 to win, to like 30 or 40,000 to show, 30 or 40,000 to win. And so like you go out and say you fight twice in a year. I mean, what it takes to compete in the UFC, for me is 7 to 9 practices a week, and then even more when you're training for a fight. So like having full-time job could be really, really challenging. Like there's going to
Oh yeah.
be, you know, and you can do it. There's people that have done it, you know, they don't do it for very long. And the few that were like, oh man, I work, uh, they're more on the 1.9 years and 3 fights. And I'm not saying there's anything, you know, negative with that, but what it takes to compete at that level, like you have to make sacrifices and you have to train, even if it is 4, 10, and 10, because you could be 3 or 4 fights away from, you know, fighting for a title. You could be five
Yeah.
fights away from fighting for a title and making life changing amount of money for certain people, you know. And it's like, for me, it wasn't the money. Early on in the career, I wanted to be the baddest son of a bitch on the planet, and then later on, it changed to like, I want to be a beacon of hope for people who are struggling with addiction. Uh, and then there's been like lots of changes. Well, okay, it's not what I thought it was going to be. You know, at some points in my career, it was like the comparison, like I had beat a few really good guys, and I was kind of like looking like, oh man, this guy's buying a Lamborghini. He's got a big house, you know, and I'm like, man, well, why am I not that guy? And then you have to really question yourself, like, well, you know, do you need a Lamborghini, or, you know, do you need a 10,000 square foot house? Cause at the time I had 2 kids, and, you know, do you need 10,000 square feet? And I'm not talking about anybody else. I'm talking about myself. I'm
Yeah.
questioning myself. No, you don't. And what are you doing it for? You know, are you doing it to acquire a big house? Like if you're fighting to acquire a big house, for me, that isn't good enough of a reason to go through what I've been through. Like a big house for me right now, if you gave me a big house and said, okay, would you trade all of this for a big house? Um, I would not trade the experience that I've had, but also too, a big house is not enough for me to go through 17 major surgeries
Yeah.
and and fly all the way across the world and fight a guy who got caught for cheating and then losing that fight, and doing that while I had a staph infection and shingles. You know, is a big house worth that? Nah, I wouldn't do that, dude. I'd rather not do that. You know what I mean? And so I look back, and being a beacon of hope for people is kind of my biggest motivator to show up 7 to 9 times a week. And then also too, having the follow through where if people come to me and they ask for help, I can actually help them through practical application and personal experience. And for me, like that is an incredible feeling. And then doing that with training, you know, I have
Mhm.
people that come with me. I had a conversation. So I have 4 fighters fighting Friday night in Idaho Falls, and then we have 4 more fighters, possibly five. No, we have 5 more fighters fighting in St. George on Saturday night. And so, and we're really active, and we have 2 of those fighters on Friday night that it's their very first fight. Actually, one of them that's their very first fight.
That's exciting for him too.
Yeah, it's exciting, but there's a lot of fear, and
Mhm.
being able to give them the experience through practical application. You know, it's like one of the highlight fights of my career was against Robert Whitaker, and he was the former UFC champion. He's, you know, I mean, he's a Hall of Famer in the
Mhm.
UFC, incredible athlete, and he was an incredible athlete when I fought him, and that's the first time, because I had not fought in Utah since before I made it into the UFC, and um, it was in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I have a lot of family in Indianapolis and in Indiana and Illinois. And so I had a lot of like first and second cousins, and I mean like 50 or 60 people from my family were going to be there. And I was like nervous that I was going to lose in front of my family for some reason. It was just weird,
Yeah.
and I had a bunch of fights in the UFC. I was probably in the UFC for 6 or 7 years at the time. Um, and, I was paralyzed in fear before leaving to the venue. And I was scared that I wasn't going to make enough money. I was scared that I was going to get injured. And I was scared I was going to lose in front of my family. And I fell back on sponsorship and that individual that helped me in my recovery journey. And I went through a process of writing my fears down and kind of distinguishing whether or not they're rational or irrational. And some of them were completely irrational, some of them were rational,
Mm-hmm.
but the rational ones I was able to kind of take action on. I was able to get up out of my bed, go over to the venue, do the warm up, and go out and compete. And it ended up being, a really, really close fight. It was a unanimous decision win or a split decision win in my favor. But he was the UFC champion at the time. Um, and I got done, and I mean, it was one of the gnarliest fights I've ever had. He was definitely one. I mean, after I got done fighting him, I remember telling the matchmaker at the time, like, that's the best guy I've ever fought. That is by far the best guy I've ever fought. And I remember I had a manager at the time, and he was like, yeah, well, if you would have finished that guy, like, we could have got you more money for this next fight, but just decisions they don't look at. And I just and after that, I ended up firing those guys. But they had no idea what I had went through to be there, and I had to pay a percentage of my purse to those idiots.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, dude, when you talk about having a team around you and people around you trust, how important is it? It can be the most important thing you do. I would rather not be around people like that and do something on my own than be around somebody who uh, possibly will take advantage of you. And I don't put myself in a position to take advantage of anymore. And I'm able to pass that on to my athletes now. Like, hey, listen, there's some traps here, and you got to be
Mm-hmm.
careful and you got to be aware. And then you can make an educated decision going into this. And after that fight, it's like I learned a lot about myself. And then I mean, within 2 or 3 years, dude, he was a dominating UFC champion. And I was like, I knew that guy was good, and after that, I decided that I was going to fight the best guys in the world. You know what I mean? I decided I got an opportunity to fight Sean Strickland, and nobody wanted to fight Sean Strickland at the time. It was a really tough fight. It ended in a draw, and then it got overturned. And it was a really good fight, but I got done and I thought, man, that guy's good, and then a couple years later, he becomes UFC champion and kind of dominant, Sean Brady, he was
Yep.
a fight away or fought for the title. I mean, one of the top 4 or 5 guys for a number of years now, and nobody wanted to fight that guy. It was his first fight in the UFC. And I mean, when I got called, it was like, hey, I can't find anybody to fight this guy. Would you be willing to take this? And I was like, absolutely. You never know when you get to fight the best guys in the world.
Yeah.
And when I leave there, I mean, I got 15 minutes in the octagon with one of the best guys in the world. And it's like, I got a whole bunch of those. And like that I am grateful for the opportunity to do that and having that, under my belt, and then me being able to take those experiences and pass them on to athletes that are coming up right now. Invaluable. So,
Oh, absolutely. And I always tell people, we've done a bunch of podcasts with people going through recovery,
yeah.
and their biggest thing is, I was so ashamed of my story, right? Like, I
Yeah.
was so ashamed and I didn't want to tell anyone. It was embarrassing. But then they said, once I started opening up, I noticed people gravitated toward me
Oh, yeah.
and asked me questions and said, hey, I'm going through the same thing. What can I do? Like, sharing your story doesn't just, it's not just for the people around you. It's for anybody who's willing to listen, right? Anyone who's
Oh,
going through
yeah.
the same thing as you went
Yep.
through with the pills and the heroin, and it helps people so much. I mean, that's the reason why
Oh, yeah.
I started the podcast, was to help, show stories of the kids at the school and
Yeah.
everything. And now people are contacting me saying, hey, I want to share my story and I want to talk to your kids. And you went to the school a
Yep.
couple of years ago,
Yep.
those kids gravitate towards you once they're like,
Yep.
oh, you're just like me.
Yep.
And hey, and my favorite thing was you stayed probably longer than what the assembly was,
Yeah.
shaking hands with everybody
Yep.
and talking to those kids. And they absolutely loved it. Right.
Yep.
And people still talk about it. And so you sharing your story, and it just opened up all these opportunities for you.
Yep. And then we had 2 of those kids show up, dude.
Yeah.
And one of them is kicking ass. The other one disappeared on me, but hey, it's like, I don't ever give up on anybody either.
They do that to us too.
Yeah.
And so,
and it's challenging, but also too, I keep that door open for any of those kids that want help. Anybody. And that's the thing, is like, second, third chances. Like there was some influential people in my life, like that guy Will Ferrell.
Hmm.
It's like had he saw something in me I didn't see in myself, and gave me an opportunity. And so, coming back from the Ultimate Fighter, calling my wife and then calling Will saying, dude, I made it in. He's like, I knew you would. He was there front row when I won the finale and dedicated my fight to all those people who were struggling.
Yeah.
And then, it's like he gave me a lot, like there's a few of those people, it's like I tried turning myself in after my last relapse to the district attorney. Um, and she ended up being a drug court liaison for Utah for a long, long time. And then she's retired. But she could have violated me and put me in prison. And that's what I thought I needed. That's what I thought would help me get sober. I was like, dude, I'm too scared and I'm too scared and it's too hard in real life for me to be out here. But if I went to prison, I think I could get sober. I would have structure. Um, and she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. It's like she didn't violate me. She put all those charges in a plea in abeyance. And she gave me an opportunity. She's like, you don't belong in there, and she put me in an aftercare program. It was like clinical consultants, nuke, which is a reintubation program for guys coming out of the state penitentiary.
Okay.
It's a halfway house and a program for that halfway house. And I went there for, I think, like 16 or 17 months, maybe 18 months. And I'm still one of the only graduates of that program that never served a day in the state penitentiary. And I didn't go and get locked up after. And I stayed sober from that point on. But for her to not violate me and for her to put me in that program, like she saw something in me I didn't see in myself. Same thing with the English teacher that was like, Court, dude, you have a lot of energy. We have a wrestling team. I'm the wrestling coach. You really should come out and wrestle. Because I didn't know there was wrestling when I was in seventh grade. And in eighth grade, he's like, why didn't you wrestle last year? And I'm like, I didn't know there was wrestling. We just work at my house. It's
Yeah.
like we didn't watch sports growing up. Like I have one older brother. We did karate when we were younger. And partly I was introduced to karate because I had this incident happen where I got left in an amusement park when I was 6 or 7 years old. And after that, I had separation anxiety. I was scared of the dark. And, the therapist that my mom and dad took me to was like, maybe you should put him in martial arts. I would help build his self-confidence. And so that's what they did. My dad joined the karate studio. He had my brother doing it. And,
Hmm.
we all did it for a number of years. And then come to find out, like the guy who owned that karate studio, he ended up being the guy who started the very first MMA promotion in Utah. And he
Oh, wow.
hired a guy that taught jujitsu early when like jujitsu was still brand new in the United. I mean, it was like the early '90s. There was a guy in there that was like showing Kimuras and Americanas, and nobody knew what that stuff was. There was a few guys like Pedro Sauer came here to Utah, and in Southern California, you had the original Gracie Academy. And so outside of that, like, man, and he had a couple of Polynesian guys in there that were boxing, these
Hmm.
Pua brothers that both just nasty boxers. And there was a bunch of other kids in there punching these heavy bags. And I'm like, man, this is so cool. And so it's like, there's a few people that cross your path that make suggestions at the right time, and
Hmm.
it's whether or not you're ready to listen to that, hopefully you get to that point at some point. And I tried to make that, the highlight. That's why I stay after I communicate with these guys or after I share my story and spend time. It's like, get to know a couple of these kids. Because sometimes they're shut off, they're shut off to
Hmm.
authority. I mean, I was, it's
I
like,
see it every day.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like you're shut off to authority. And if you're in a place of authority, it's like, I don't listen to this guy. His job is to tell me what to do. And it's like, at some point, I just look back. I never had any professional athlete reach out to me or spend time with me. And
Hmm.
here's the thing is I'm one of those kids. And I just happened to be given a couple of chances, like a whole lot of chances that I screwed up. But one or two, I made a decision to do something different. And it's kind of like they gravitate towards that.
Yeah.
Plus, seeing me battle a whole bunch in the UFC, what they think a UFC athlete is. And then I kind of lay out how I live my life. It's kind of like, oh man, this guy's a little bit different. And I love fighting. And you know, there's something different with people that compete in MMA. There's something different that people, that compete in boxing, that are truly in it. And the long term, like you're a different person. Uh, but a lot of those kids have those same attributes that I had, and I can
Hmm.
see it in them. I can see it in them, and I get a chance to give these guys an opportunity that I would have like loved. You know, And had I had those opportunities, so I create those opportunities. And man, watching a kid thrive, it's like my very first kid that I worked with uh, is in the UFC now. And he was 17 years old, dude, and
That's
he was
awesome.
locked up in juvenile justice. And that kid came into the gym, and I saw something in him that was different than every other kid in that room. And I knew he wanted it, but you cannot give that which you do not have. And he wasn't
Hmm.
ready. And when he became ready, he came to me. He ended up having to serve a prison term. He ended up having to go through ups and downs. But when he was ready, he was ready. And I introduced him to somebody. I put him in a gym. I helped him out for quite a while. And then he really started to grow and mature. And now he's going through the stages early on in my career that I went through, like questioning myself, like, why am I here? Because this is not what I thought it was.
Hmm.
It's like becoming a professional athlete is not what you think it is. It's like uh people that tell me like, how do you motivate yourself to practice like that? You know what I mean? And it's like, I never questioned that. I always do extra. Like that's what you do. That's what you have to do. And if you're thinking like, well, I don't have time to put this much time into it and do this much time, then this is not the sport for you. That's an
Hmm.
easy answer. And it's like that kid, dude, he had it. There was no question. And now, I mean, he fought on the local scene, he fought on the regional scene, and then he went the toughest way you can get, and now he's in the UFC fighting the best guys in the world. And now he's questioning, what did I get myself into? You know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it. Let's communicate. And for me, like, I can help him through that stuff. I can help him through those ups and downs.
Yeah, you've been there.
Yeah, I've been there, and we together can do more than just you by yourself.
Oh,
So
for sure.
yeah,
Man,
it's
that's
great, man.
awesome that you're giving these guys the opportunity.
Yep,
Just great.
yep,
So, one thing I want you to say, and then we can close it off of this.
yep.
If someone said, "Hey, Court, I want to come and fight," how long would it take me to get my first fight? Like if they just started coming and training, a lot of kids might have the expectation where like, "Oh, I'm going to go train and I'll go fight in like a month."
Yeah.
It's a long process, right? Like, so if someone came to your gym and said, "Hey, I actually want to be a fighter,"
Yep.
like, how long would you say this is what you got to do before you might be able to get a fight?
So there isn't an answer for one individual. It
For
depends
sure, it's
on. Yep,
individualized.
yep. But I can tell you what I did is I trained for just under a year um before I took my first MMA fight. And so you could say like first, and it was really active after that. But
Hmm.
I took amateur boxing matches, I took jiu-jitsu matches, I wrestled in some open tournaments. And I did a whole bunch of like conditioning. I did a bunch of, it's like I was prepared to go in there and compete in MMA. And so if somebody comes in, I always tell them, okay, we'll reassess at 6 months. And so if they're serious, I'll see them at 6 months.
Hmm.
Now I've had guys come in that I was like, dude, there's no way this guy's gonna ever fight. And 4 months later, he was ready and he went out and got a win. And then I've had somebody who came in who I thought like, holy cow, this guy could compete soon. And then they end up needing a little bit more time, and
Yeah.
then you have like, I've had Division I athletes, like Division I wrestlers. I've had All-Americans come in, obviously like the the dynamic is a little bit different finding a matchup for them, having D1 experience, high level coaching experience. But I always say like, don't make a decision right off the bat, but give yourself 6 months of training and preparation. Cause there's a period of time you need to go through to really like develop your body to fight, because it is a fight. There's punching, there's kicking,
Yeah.
there's kneeing, there's elbowing, there's wrestling, there's jujitsu. It's a lot more than just one dynamic. There's lots of dynamics, and you want to be prepared for that physically. And then mentally and spiritually, you need to be prepared. And that takes some ups and downs. So, like going through training when you don't want to, when you're getting your butt kicked all the time, still showing up, when you're kicking people's butt, still showing up. And so, you want to go through those ups and downs before you commit to fighting, because your first amateur MMA fight, saying you don't have any background in anything, could be in a room with 4,000 screaming people in it. And when you walk out there, and you've never been in a state championship match or a national title for boxing, or you've never been in that position, dude, and you're training in a gym, you get this and that, and then now all of a sudden it's like you walk out and there's like 4,000 people, and you're like, wait, what am I doing out here?
This is real.
This is real. It gets real quick. Dana White
Yeah.
says that, man. He says it's as real as it gets.
How many people come to your gym and just do it to train, just to train, no expectation to fight?
Probably half.
Half of
Probably
them.
half of our student body. We get a lot of college students because we have BYU, UVU, and Norda. college, the medical college. And so we get lots of people that come in that just want to practice and train, learn jujitsu, learn striking. We get a lot of people that come in that just want to learn jujitsu and then end up competing. And we have people who come there who want to come there to prep and compete in jujitsu, gi and no gi, also in mixed martial arts. So it's like we get kind of every.
Yeah.
Yep. And there isn't one age group. That's the other thing. I have my 6:30 a.m. Friday class is probably the average age is almost 40. And dude, it is a room full of nerdy killers. I'm not kidding, dude. You know, there's like one Division I college wrestler that's like, oh man, this guy's an athlete.
Mhm.
But everybody else, like, very unassuming. You know, I've got a 50-year-old college professor that will strangle the life out of most people on the earth. You know what I
That
mean? And
is
it's
cool.
like, and he's a college professor. Like if you were like, oh, this guy's a college professor, they'd be like, oh yeah, that guy's definitely a college professor. He's got a couple of daughters that wrestle, and
Mhm.
you know, it's like you would never think he was a world level competitor, and he is.
Oh,
So
that's cool. Hey, and I
yep,
mean, it's for anybody, right? It's great
yeah, oh
training
yeah,
too.
yep,
So,
yep.
anything else you want to tell those watching before we end it off?
No, just always work hard and never give up on your dreams. You know, do the next right thing. And if you know somebody who's struggling, make sure you take time to listen to them, and set boundaries. Outside of that, that's all.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming, man.
Yeah,
I
my pleasure, dude.
appreciate you.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And we're gonna see you again tomorrow.
Yes,
Coming down
sir.
to the
Yeah.
school,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
it's gonna be awesome.
Yep.
So thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time.